Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wise Brussels Voices and our series with women leaders. I'm Ilana Bet-El. I'm a member of Wise Brussels, that's Women in International Security, and I'm your host for this conversation with women who are leading and shaping the world in many ways and fields. This is a special short episode devoted to understanding the events and repercussions of the horrendous Hamas attack on Israel on 7th of October and the unfolding war in Gaza. There is a real danger it may expand to Lebanon or Syria, or indeed potentially a wider regional event. But even if not, 1 week in, we're faced with new and dangerous realities. With the war in Ukraine still in full flow, Europe now has 2 conflicts on its borders, and the US has to deal with 2 allies in danger. But that is not all. Africa is experiencing a series of coups. Azerbaijan strode into Armenia and annexed it, causing 100,000 ethnic Armenians to flee. And throughout this all, the multilateral system, the UN notably, is dysfunctional, and Russia and Iran appear to be very happy. This is a world of disorder, and we're seeking a few pointers to understand the immediate implications. To this end, we have with us the eminent German journalist and commentator, Anna Sauerbrey, foreign editor of Die Zeit, and a columnist for the New York Times. Hi, Anna, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Good. We usually start, and let us not ruin that particular tradition, with you introducing yourself so that we can have a better idea who we're talking to.
Well, as I said, happy to be here. So I have been the foreign editor at Die Zeit, which is Germany's largest weekly newspaper for 1.5 years now. I started there on February 15th, just a few days before Russia went for a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So that has very much been an event I am following very closely throughout my time there. I have been, as you said, with Der Tagesspiegel before that, which is a Berlin daily newspaper where I've headed the opinion pages and was the deputy editor-in-chief. That was my last position with my old newspaper. I am very much interested in the United States. I go there for reporting trips several times a year, and I have written for the New York Times in Germany. So I often take that dual perspective, the transatlantic perspective, looking from a German perspective at the United States and from a US perspective at Germany. And I have 2 kids. I live in Berlin with my family, and also I'm a lot in Hamburg, of course, where my newspaper is headquartered.
Well, that sounds lovely. I should also point out that you're a historian and you have a PhD in history from Mainz University. Is that correct?
Yes, in early modern history.
Since I'm also an historian, I always point out when people have a history background. But maybe this will come in useful. Anna, where are we and how have we ended up here so suddenly?
I'm not sure we have ended up here suddenly. It certainly does seem so now. But now, looking back at maybe the past years, the Israeli government's policies towards Palestinians, also the international community, and particularly the United States losing interest in solving that core conflict in the Middle East. Looking back at all that, it's maybe not that surprising what we see now. But at the same time, it came as a surprise to Israel, it seems. It came as a surprise to many Western countries and the United States. The vigor, also the vitality of the hatred, obviously, of the Hamas fighters who managed to penetrate the border to Israel, killing hundreds of people in really atrocious acts of murder and violence. All that came as a surprise, and I think it has traumatized Israel, and it's also a traumatic experience for the world community.
And how do you think it's being perceived both in Germany and in the US?
I think when we look at the government's reaction, both the US government and the German government couldn't have been clearer in their condemnation of the violence against Israel, of the terrorist attack itself, and in its message of support. I think it was pretty ambivalent, also comparing it maybe with the EU reaction. There was of course, there was some cautioning half sentences towards Israel of being proportionate, I think was the word used mostly in the United States in their reaction to the conflict, but nobody used the word restraint, for example. And so I think it really was Germany and the US and also other Western countries very clearly taking the side of Israel and showing their empathy with the Israeli people. The Quint issued a joint statement that is the United States, together with Germany, France, and Britain and Italy, which was pretty much the same language as Biden's statement this week. I think it's a different story when you look at the domestic reaction or the societal reactions. In Germany, there were some pro-Palestinian demonstrations, though small. But I think when you listen to Jewish people in Germany, when you listen to Palestinian people to Germany, and I've just returned from a stay in Harvard, where really the whole Harvard community was upset by the events, and where the events have really instilled a lot of partisanship and agony and unpeace. So I think the societal reaction is much more ambivalent and causes a lot more pain than the very univocal government responses.
And what about the broader Europe? I mean, the EU did not exactly excel itself this week in one way or another, probably as ever from that point of view. But nonetheless, is Europe divided over this issue, or do you perceive Europe to be united?
I think the largest countries are pretty united in their response. I was a bit surprised about Borrell's response. He spoke in Oman after a meeting with Arab leaders. And I think that was sort of the inverse of what we saw as a reaction from the United States and larger countries like Germany, clearly addressing the Israelis, saying they have the right to defend themselves, but really warning that it has to be done in accordance with international law and humanitarian law, and also saying that some decisions Israel has already taken, like blocking the Gaza Strip, and now most recently asking people to leave the northern parts of the Gaza Strip to go south. 1.1 million people actually being asked to leave their homes in the Gaza Strip. That those acts are against international law. So that was, I think, the clearest condemnation of Israel's reaction we have seen in the West, which is not in line with the largest nation states. I find that pretty interesting.
Indeed, it is. And at the same time, the Ukrainian war has not gone anywhere. It is still there. It is still flaming away. It's just been knocked down into the second order of headlines. It was very striking to see in a lot of newspapers or in a lot of platforms and internet platforms how much it was now second rank, and sort of these events had taken first rank. Do you perceive that this was planned, let's say, by Russia, that there was any communication between Russia and Hamas, Russia and Ukraine? Because this clearly is very much useful to Russia.
I don't know, and I haven't seen any evidence yet. I mean, we do see some indicators of Iran's involvement. Probably everybody listening has read about the Wall Street Journal story that was based on sources both in Hezbollah and Hamas, saying that they had been helped by Iran. Of course, we don't know to what extent that really was the case, or whether that was part of the broader strategy of making this a major conflict, of really escalating things in the region. This could be. And then there's, of course, this indirect tie, the close relationship that Russia and Iran have formed since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Russia very much depending on Iranian weapons deliveries, particularly drones. I believe there's a plant, a drone building plant being built in Russia by Iran to supply those drones and even higher quantities to Russia. and also trade between the two countries picking up for the lack of other alternatives. Um, in how far Russia really was involved in planning this, some in the security community may know, I do not. But of course, it is against the backdrop of the conflict in Ukraine too, that Western intelligence services may have been distracted and have just, reattributed resources to the war in Ukraine in recent years. And it could be possible that this is one of the reasons why this came as such a surprise.
That really leads to the heart of the matter, especially for Europe. But war on two fronts. Do you think Europe is up to it?
I mean, since I don't think Europe or any of the major European nations will get directly involved in the Israel war anytime soon. I mean, Germany has now done a lot, comparing it to the old Germany before the famous Zeitenwende speech. Germany will deliver some military support to Israel, for example. It will give Israel a couple of drones that they had actually leased from Israel that used to be in Germany, which will now go back to Israel. So but this is like on a very small scale compared to, of course, what Germany and other European countries are providing in aid to Ukraine. So I think it will be more the United States who has to ask themselves how much are they invested in this new war in Israel? How much support will they send there? They have already deployed one aircraft carrier, and they will deploy planes to Israel, which at the moment is, of course, rather like a gesture and a gesture of resolution and support, of military resolution and support. There's no indication yet that these military means will actually be used to support Israel in this war. I don't think so for the moment being. But of course, it does take a lot of diplomatic resources. It's the refocusing of where also and Tony Blinken and other top diplomats are looking for. And I do think it will be difficult to maintain the same focus on both conflicts at the same time, even for a very large country with a very large State Department like the United States.
And coming back to Germany, do you think Germany is capable at this point, when it appears to be in internal turmoil to a certain extent too, with its government not terribly stable? How will it react to not necessarily providing weapons or not providing weapons, but this is a geostrategic crisis at the end of the day, and it is sitting on the border of, the Middle East isn't near China. The Middle East, though the EU tends to pretend it's near China, the Middle East is actually just down the road from Cyprus and Greece. So does Germany have the capacity to think strategically in these situations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it has the capability to think strategically. I'm not sure Germany is going to go beyond the gestures of solidarity that we have seen from the government in recent days. As you said, it is in a difficult domestic situation with the far right surging, the government being rather unstable or in constant conflict. And I'm not sure Germany is in the best position either to play, for example, a role as a mediator in this conflict. It has been Germany's line, at least since Angela Merkel spoke in front of the Knesset in 2008, that Israel's security is a German Staatsräson, reason of state. And as I said, Germany has taken a very unambivalent position and has so far not called on Israel to show some restraint in its military reaction to the terror attack. So I'm not sure Germany would make the best mediator. And I'm not sure this government wants to be involved in another major crisis as a major player. It just doesn't seem to be their field. And yeah, in a way, it's a shame because I think Germany would have the capacity to do so. But it hasn't made the Middle East a priority either in recent years. On the contrary, it has stood by and looked at and provided some humanitarian aid to Palestinian organizations, has sold some weapons to Israel, but that's about it.
And taking a step back to the broader EU position, I mean, they didn't exactly excel themselves this week. You know, sort of most of the focus appeared to be an argument between over messaging, you know, Borrell saying one thing, the parliament saying another. Do you think they will sort themselves out and be capable of offering some more coherent and potentially geostrategic capability?
I mean, it would be good because the EU if the EU had like a really excellent top diplomat, or if Ursula von der Leyen would decide to really, throw herself into the game, the EU would be in a pretty good position to play a mediating role because they, other than Germany or the United States, have a have more of a tradition of really being in contact with both sides, and many EU funds are used to support Palestinian aid organizations. And it has also, as we saw now with Borrell in Oman, it has the channels to speak with the Arab countries. It would also be able to speak to Israel. But as you said, the reactions were quite divided. The major players, France and Germany and Italy, have very much signed on to the American position. So it's hard to imagine that the EU really does play a major role in a diplomatic solution.
So it's the US again.
It's down to the US again there, which is depressing. I mean, we've talked about more geopolitical European Union, a more geopolitical Germany. We did see a Zeitenwende on both levels. We saw a Zeitenwende in Germany as one of the most important state within the European Union, and we've also seen the EU really stepping up in the conflict with Ukraine, offering membership, providing military support, providing financial support to Ukraine. But it seems like this is not repeated in this conflict on the very, very border of the European Union.
So let's look ahead. What do you think is going to happen now over this coming week?
To me, the immediate outlook is quite dire because I think first what we will see in the coming hours with the military buildup at the border to the Gaza Strip, with the call to 1.1 million Palestinians in Gaza to leave the northern parts of the strip. The first thing we will see is just more violence. I mean, I have not been to Gaza. I've been to the West Bank and to Israel, but I do remember the claustrophobic feeling that comes over you when you're in this country, and when you realize when you're there how small it all is and how densely populated, and just to imagine that Israel might attempt a ground offensive or try to occupy some of the northern part of the Gaza Strip, or even just bombard it even more intensively than we've already seen it in the past days. There's just a horrific sight looking at it just as human being, not like a geopolitical observer. And I think that's what we will now see in the coming days, unfortunately.
And what if the northern border, or what if Lebanon and Hezbollah get involved?
It would be a strain on Israel, and it would put Israel in a very difficult situation, I think. I mean, right now, and I'm not familiar enough with the conditions in Lebanon to really have my own expertise on that. But I think what most experts on the region keep hoping for is that Lebanon is just too preoccupied with its own problems. I mean, it's basically a broken state, and which hardly can provide its own population with enough electricity and clean water. Corruption is on a very high level, and it's not quite clear that the very divided government there is going to want to be a major player in this conflict and take the Israeli retaliation on top of all of the other problems that are piling up in the country. So we can hope that Lebanon right now is too weak, maybe to become involved.
Lebanon itself, yes, but Hezbollah, when it's not in the government or when it is in the government, does not usually really care about what the rest of Lebanon has to suffer if it wants to do something. I think that really brings us back to the US. The US, best of my understanding, it moved its aircraft carriers closer to Lebanon, not just as a sign of solidarity with Israel, but also to signal Iran that it shouldn't come closer, and therefore to try and restrain Hezbollah. So I think we can summarize by saying, let's hope that this week we'll see the ending of the war in Gaza and no spread of the war further, because I think that would be a great danger also for Europe and for the much wider region.
Absolutely. Let's still hope for the best.
Let's still hope for the best. Anna, thank you very, very much. And we very much hope to see you back here on our podcast again in a further episode. That's a wrap on this episode of Wise Brussels Voices. Thank you so much to Anna Sauerbrey for joining us here at very short notice. We'd also like to thank our technical team at Free Range Productions. Keep listening to our conversations and support us with a subscription on your podcast platform. Leave us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and of course, add to the conversation with your comments. We're on all media as Wise Brussels, so reach out on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and even TikTok. Learn more about Wise Brussels on our website, wise-brussels.org. I'm Ilana Bet-El with my friend and producer, Florence Ferrando, and we'll be back very soon with another great conversation.